This is pretty wild, guys. Everybody is always very focused on Jesus, but people forget that the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church had to venerate Mother Mary without hardly any reason given to us as to why she became the person in these traditions who intercedes on our behalf to Jesus. And it is because of these 6 apocryphal books that described what she did after the death of Jesus that were so intense books, intensity of books, that kings hunted these books down in history. They were attributed to the apostles taking down the information of what she did afterwards. And what she did was no small feat. It just so happens to be that we don't get to hear about them very often because basically the female usually gets scrubbed out of history. So join me on my YouTube when I show you the summary here. And if you want to see the research that I've done on this, head over to my Patreon. So thank you for the North American Society for the Study of Christian Apocryphal Literature for organizing what you have in summary and in setting up the links of these 6 apocryphal books that almost nobody has freaking heard of, and putting their lists of books in their Syriac translations and their Ethiopian translations and the information on who translated them onto your page. Without you, it would have been a harder hell of a time figuring out how to go about getting access to these books, since they are all practically written in Syriac and other languages. And originally, they got translated into concepts like Latin and French, and I think German, and then finally English. And I'm going to give you the summaries of these books in this video, because just the summaries alone of each of these 6 books is pretty wild and pretty mind-blowing. I will start off by saying that if you don't look into these 6 apocryphal books, then some of the other areas that you can find about the life of Mother Mary, Mary the mother of Jesus, you can look into the book called the Proto-Evangelium of James, which is also, I think, called the Apocryphal Book of James, which was her, I believe it's her, I think it's Jesus, James was like Jesus's cousin. Anyways, either stepson or cousin or something to that effect, and or both. Also a book called The Vision of Theophilus, which you can actually find on Amazon. It's translated into English. And the Infancy Gospel of Thomas is one that is certainly translated into English. You can find that on YouTube and just listen to the audiobook if you want. But a lot of people think of that book when they think of the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Nag Hammadi Library. Now, these 6 books that I'm about to talk to you about, these are like a huge part of the reason why the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church venerate Mary as much as they do, and also helps us to understand why in history we see a bunch of apparitions of Mary instead of seeing a bunch of apparitions of Jesus a lot of the time. Like, there are apparitions that have been reported of Mother Mary right up to this century, right up into the last 30 years. There are still people who say that Mary appears in where is it? The area over in Bosnia that is called, oh, I gotta think of it, Medjugorje, the border of Croatia and Bosnia. And to this day, every single year, there is a woman who professes that she receives a vision from Mother Mary connected to Medjugorje. And this kind of focusing in on Mother Mary happens because in tradition, according to the way the Catholic and Orthodox Church venerated Mary, she became the one who intercedes on behalf of our lives, the lives of us sinners, to deal with Jesus. The idea is that Jesus was resurrected, and he's got a lot of things that he's doing. He's a busy dude, okay? To put it in a humorous way. And while he's doing whatever it is that he's doing in the afterlife or in the spiritual realm or as an ascended master or whatever you want to call it, Mary deals with having such a good heart and love for humanity that she often comes to support, according to tradition, the sinners of the world who are really trying to reach out to God and Jesus. You know, we sin, we suck. A lot of the times we're just kind of being our human selves and stumbling, and we always ask for God to be our refuge, but a lot of the times in history it is Mary who's come to support people. And why is that? Why is it that, with the Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church, they don't have very many verses in the Bible about what happened to Mary in the reported 11 years after she died, and yet so many feasts are attributed to her, so much veneration goes to her, an entire rosary is said and dedicated to her. Like, how many times you say the Hail Mary, even why the idea is that we hail Mary in these traditions. We don't have technically a prayer that says Hail Jesus the way that we do Hail Mary. We've got the Our Father, right? But we also have the Hail Mary. And so again, where do these traditions come from? Why is it that we don't hear much about Mary, but yet there's so many ritualistic dedications to her? That's the point of these books. These books describe what Mary did afterwards. Book 1 of these 6 apocryphal books says, according to NASCAL, and according to them, they've written this because, they read the damn books. So according to the books, we will also say, Book 1 begins with a long encomium to Mary. According to the narrative, 3 holy men at Mount Sinai wanted to read the book about Mary's death, written by John the theologian, and wrote Cyrus the bishop of Jerusalem. These three holy men wrote the bishop, and Cyrus, he ended up finding a letter in which James had written that the 12 apostles wrote 6 books about Mary's passing. So again, let me say that again. There is a letter that the early Bishop Cyrus found, and then he was like, damn, there are 6 books written by the 12 apostles? I'm sure he looked into the Vatican records to find a letter if he was a bishop of Jerusalem at the time. Now, Cyrus sent people who finally found the book in Ephesus after the Apostle John came to them in a dream and told them, take this book to Mount Sinai, so that there would be a commemoration of Mary 3 times a year. The account of Mary begins then later on in Book 2, with Mary going to the tomb of her son carrying incense and fire in a censer. When she throws myrrh on the censer, the angel Gabriel appears and tells her that she will soon depart from this world. This is the story now in Book 2. Book 1 is how they found this out. Book 2 is what the heck happened to Mary after Jesus died. The angel Gabriel comes down and appears and tells her that she's soon going to pass on. The guards at the tomb inform some priests that Mary was praying at this time, and the priest asked the governor to tell Mary not to pray at the grave of Jesus. Mention is made in Book 2 of a king called King Abgar, who was sending letters blaming the Jews for Jesus' death. Tiberius then reads this letter and wants to kill off the Jews for this. The governor ends up telling the priests to do what they wish with Mary, but she refuses to do what they ask. Mary then falls sick, and she wants to go to Bethlehem. When she goes to Bethlehem, people come to her and she starts blessing them. There are 3 virgins who start to serve her, bringing her censer and spices, and Mary lifts her arm and blesses them. They all go to Bethlehem, where Mary tells the women to bring her these censers because she wants to pray. Here, a small lacuna is filled by one of the manuscripts. One of the translators, his name was Wright. His last name was Wright. And in this, Mary asks for John the Young to come to her, and he came from Ephesus. Mary then tells John to set out the censer, and first she and then he start to pray, and the Holy Spirit then comes down and tells the other apostles to go to Jerusalem, to which they end up arriving on clouds. Each report to Mary what they are doing. Mary raises her arm and prays to God, after which the apostles end up prostrating. Now, the reason that I'm describing this is because, again, these books were hunted down by kings like King Abgar. They were reported about the scenario by Tiberius, right? She went on to go and bless people. So imagine your position as the governors at the time, as the people who just were the Jews who killed off Jesus. And you've got this woman going around blessing people still. The problem wasn't solved in their eyes, in the eyes of the people who tried to get rid of Jesus at the time. You've got this woman going around doing some things, right? Causing some attention, okay? And we don't hear about this kind of thing again from the perspective of the Bible. So it's nice to get a bird's eye view and a mind frame, or even the names of the people, like the kings or Tiberius, or the idea that it was the priests. It's good to kind of be able to zone in on some of the characters in these narratives, because then we can go look at some of their books or some of their teachings. It's kind of like the way we look at Josephus or Josephus. I can never say his name right. When we look at his traditions, those aren't the Bible, but yet we can still look at other books and we can see, like, okay, did anybody mention these kind of things? There was a lot of wars that happened within those next couple of decades that occurred, like the Roman Jewish war situations, the 70 AD type situations that happened. And when we start to see what was happening prior to those wars, we get a bit of a feel of, like, hey, what were the apostles doing? What was it that Mary was doing? What was the buildup of all the tensions that happened, leading to a lot of these wars that happened after Jesus had been crucified? So that's book 2. Book 3 then goes on. We've got, and again, these are apocryphal books that were reported to have been written by the apostles that these kings started to hunt down, okay? These women come to Mary from cities around the Mediterranean, and Mary ends up doing what? She ends up friggin' teaching them and blessing them. And that's some of the things that a lot of people forget about what happens in the lives of the apostles, like the Apostle Paul, for instance. Yes, he had a very tragic ending. I don't know if you ever heard of what happened to Paul, but there were people that he taught under him, like Theudas, and you know who Theudas taught afterwards? The Valentinus, that is from Valentinian Gnosticism. Yes, the very books that were kept out of the Bible are always reported to have been from the students of the apostles, because they went on to teach people how to do what? Not just to pray. Bro, these people were like, doing miracles. These people were like raising people from the dead and casting out demons. They were certainly causing a bit of a ruckus after the death of Jesus. Jesus was even known to have said at the time, just prior to his crucifixion, that if they crucified him, they're definitely going to crucify and go after and despise the apostles. And so again, these books tell more of that story. And it wasn't just the apostles who went around teaching people. Girl, Mary, she was doing something. She was teaching women who came from around the Mediterranean. And so now we have to look at, who were these women? Where did they go? Who did they teach after? So Mary teaches these women and blesses them and gives them writings to take back to their city. Then Mary starts healing people, especially women, by sprinkling water and sealing and laying her hands on their heads and exorcising demons. She heals a boy and then 2,800 people. 2,800 people, guys. Apocryphal books that the church kept out of the Bible, but venerated her for anyways. Gave her feasts. The Feast of the Assumption of Mary is coming up in a couple days. The month of August is here, right? The rosary that we pray in these traditions isn't something that just got forgotten about in history. And why was it? 2,800 people? Oof, the governors at the time had to have just been tripping. And that's what it says. The priests, the high priests of the time, very unhappy about this. They go to the governor again, who says he's not going to drive her out of her house, but he does order 30 men to bring her to him. Meanwhile, the apostles carry Mary in a procession to her house in Jerusalem. Angels are going in and out of Mary's house. And because of this, there's a lot of people whose attentions are caught, and they start to assemble outside of the home. They're coming to Mary. She's healing people. She's doing the work that Jesus had just done. And so, what do you think's going to happen? People are going to be like, oh my God, who did we just crucify? We just crucified her son. Did she really birth the Messiah? That's got to be a problem. That's got to be pretty damn problematic, right? For in the eyes of those high priests who thought that they had, They thought they took care of things. Those high priests didn't want Jesus going around bringing in, Christianos, the anointed ones, the Nazarenes of the time. Um, and so again, the book continues on. The governor would not listen to the high priest and just drive her out. And people are like assembling outside of her home. That would have obviously caused a ruckus. If people are already gathering outside and they're like, damn, like you guys took the Messiah from us. Like, what are you doing? What are you Jews doing? What are you governors doing? Right? If you just decided to go and burn down her home after she was blessing people like this, that would literally have caused an uproar. And it may very well have caused an uproar that we might not even realize about because we haven't been looking into these kind of books. Again, most people focus on the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Nag Hammadi scripts. There are things like the Ochronicus papyrus that nobody even realizes was dug up. The Gnostic apocryphal books that were like dug up 100 years before anybody even heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls being dug up. Yeah, there's a lot of things that we don't get our hands on. So, anyways, continuing on here. He doesn't want to burn down her house, but the priests do. They're like, we're going to burn her house down to the ground, and eventually the governor approves it. But everybody who tries to burn down her house end up being burnt by the flames of God. And because of this, the governor at the time finally believes and starts to blame the priests, the elders, and the Sadducees. Notice it's not the Pharisees, by the way. But the priests, I got to get into that at some point. The Pharisees have always been given a bad rap, but there's a lot of kind of indication that perhaps it wasn't the Pharisees that were being little shitheads. Look at Nicodemus. Nicodemus was a Pharisee. He went to the side of Jesus, right? They weren't against a Messiah coming, so the understanding goes, right? But the Sadducees certainly did have a cooperation agreement with, at the time, what would have been like Rome, or apparently the Herodian dynasties and those who came afterwards. So the governor finally believes, because now the flames of God have come down. Certainly something we don't hear about very often in history. And there becomes this gigantic great debate that starts to happen. The governor tells the unbelievers to reveal where the 3 crosses are buried. And they do. And they report that the site where where Jesus was, he was crucified, right? Crucified with 2 other people on a mound, on a hill. And apparently the report back is that this location where the crosses are healing thousands of people. And this kind of reminds me of the infancy gospel of Thomas, where we hear the stories of what happened with Jesus when he was a child. It's said in those traditions that at the birth of Jesus, just to give a quick little blip on that at the birth of Jesus, the magi came and they gave gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh to Jesus, his mother, and Mary. At the time, all she had to give to the magi, the Persian magi, was the swaddling cloth of baby Jesus. But when they brought the swaddling cloth of baby Jesus back to their neck of the woods, the magi, the story is, in these traditions, and written down in these apocryphal books, is that the swaddling cloth of Jesus, was so holy that the magi tested out if it could be burnt, and they tried to burn it in a fire and it wouldn't burn. And then they started like putting it on their face and they were like holding it, and it was giving blessings and healings. So that there are, and in history, in like especially a lot of what we talk about with like Catholicism and things like that in the early church, yes, they've done a lot of bad things, but there's been a lot of like, apparitions that have occurred, bodies that aren't decaying all of a sudden. That's what happens with the saints, right? The saints ended up getting a lot of attention because when their bodies died, their bodies wouldn't actually decay, and it friggin' tripped people out. And the same goes with these crosses here. The crosses of Jesus got buried, and at the site where these happened, thousands of people were getting healed all of a sudden. The governor goes and orders more stones be heaped upon the site so that it won't heal the children of Israel. But then the governor has a sick son. Now he's tripping because his son's about to get sick, and he knows there's a chick healing people. So he goes to see Mary. And Mary has such a darn good heart for the sinners of the world and the wicked men of the world that when they find Mary praying with a censer, she blesses the freaking governor and preaches the gospel to him. Even though he was just the one who decided to try and stop other people from being healed. It's fascinating. Like I said, when I say that these books are fascinating, woo, guys, wait till you see the Patreon video that I have created of the research that I'm doing on these books. Okay, so they find Mary praying and she blesses the governor and preaches the gospel to him and then heals his son with her hand and seals him. Mary continues her miracles and the apostles write them down, including appearing to people from Rome, helping sailors, helping people in danger of robbers, rescuing a widow's son from a well, curing a man who cast incense on a censer and called upon her, and then more. She appears both in these countries and at the same time in Jerusalem with the apostles. The Holy Spirit then comes and tells the apostles to take her to a cave. The Jews start to mock them. And then there is a manuscript that continues the story with the scribes telling a person named Euphana to knock Mary from her litter, but their arms end up falling off. But his arms fall off. They try to take her away from the rest of her family, and their arms fall off. And then he implores Mary, and Mary tells Peter to reattach his arms. Like, bro, what? Despite Peter's actions, the Jews still want to burn Mary's body, so Jesus comes. This is another return of Jesus coming. Prior to like 70 AD, because Mary apparently only lived for another 11 years after Jesus died, or got resurrected. And then he gathers his mother from the world, and then we have, the Assumption of Mary. Now there is the continuation of all of this that happens in Book 4 when the apostles begin to attend Mary in a cave. The Holy Spirit tells them to set the censer, and the Lord is going to come for his mother on the following day. On the Sabbath, we have, in the evening, Mary's mother and Elizabeth end up arriving along with the patriarchs from Adam to David and 72 apostles. Like, this is like people coming in spirit to her. Like, this is a congregation of spiritual beings who come down when it's time for Mary to have her Assumption, and then Christ arrives on a chariot of seraphim. He tells Mary that her body will reside in paradise until the resurrection, according to these apocryphal books, and then the apostles ask her to bless the world and those who commemorate for her. She kisses Jesus' hands and asks him to accept the offerings that people present to her in these commemorations. And the apostles write down that there should be 3 commemorations in a year in Mary's name. Guys, this is why the Catholic Church and all of the feasts of Mary happen. Because of what? Because of the massive miracles that were being performed by Mary and the miraculous things that were happening with the apostles and those they were teaching as students after the resurrection of Jesus happened. When I said that this book was filled with some wild stuff, I was not kidding. The apostles write down that there should be 3 commemorations a year in Mary's name. And then there is a liturgical manual and the instructions on how bread is to be offered to Mary, the way that we kind of give the Eucharist to Jesus at church. Book 5 then talks about the story where Mary's in paradise. This becomes kind of like a visionary book like Enoch, like the way that Enoch was given a vision about how things are in the different heavens. Mary rises up. Jesus literally says, Mary, rise, and she is restored to life. And her body, this is why they call it the Assumption of her body, because her body went missing, guys. People are like, where did her body go? Essentially, her whole body resurrected. That's how powerful Jesus was in these apocryphal texts. She's restored to life, and he takes his mother on a tour of heaven with her in the bodily form, in a chariot of light with wheels of fire. She enters the 12 gates of heaven. Like I said, it gets very Enochian all of a sudden, and he shows her hidden and terrible things. Those terrible things are probably some of the terrible things that are mentioned of in the Nag Hammadi and the Dead Sea Scrolls. And then finally in Book 6, we get the vision of Mary. She sees two worlds, one that passes away and one that does not pass away. And that starts to help us answer some of the questions that we have when it comes to the book of Revelations. So for those of you who are interested in understanding a world that passes away, well, try to check out book 6 of the 6 books of Mary. So she sees two worlds, one that passes away and one that does not pass away. And in the later, the one that does not pass away, she sees the tabernacles of the just and multitudes standing on this side of these tabernacles. Jesus tells her, from a distance, they behold their happiness until the day of resurrection, when they shall inherit their mansions, their homes, their paradise. Then Mary sees another place that smells of sulfur, and she offered a prayer for the sinners and said, Rabbi, I would assume that would be a translation of, please have mercy upon the wicked. And Jesus takes his mother to the paradise of Eden. Mary calls John and tells him everything that she has been shown. And then they wrote it down. And then these books were hunted down by kings and brought into the archives of the Vatican Church. And that is why the Eastern Orthodox Church, the early church fathers, and the Catholic Church venerate Mary as the interceding person, the person who essentially speaks on behalf of the sinners, right? Because she was the one who said she saw the vision of this place of sulfur where the sinners are going, and her heart was so hurt that she was like, no way. She's like, no way, you can't send these people here. Like, this is brutal. And that's when Jesus, told her what's going to happen, yada, yada, yada. And then honestly, then we got to look to these people that she taught. That's a really interesting concept. Check this out, okay? Some of the historical figures and characters who were mentioned in these books were people like, where is it here? James, the son of Zebedee. Okay? And James, the son of Zebedee, he's the one who wrote the secret book of John. James the righteous is the one who wrote the Apocryphal book of James. These are the ones that were dug up in the Nag Hammadi library in the Dead Sea Scroll. And even, remember, she kept dealing with women. Some of the women that she was teaching these blessings and to carry on these miracles were people like the daughter of Nicodemus, the Pharisee. It's just fascinating that we can kind of get a even the daughter of Gamaliel, Neshri. Like, I know a bunch of people who are researching these exact topics that would just love to find these books, I swear. Because so many people focus on the Bible, and they focus on the Bible as like the thing of things. Like, you don't need any other book but the Bible. But honestly, who said that? The church? The Catholic Church? I get that the Bible is important, I really do. But as a person who studies Gnosticism, and I mean, you're listening to this video on a page, a YouTube channel dedicated to Gnosticism, it was quite often that you find in history that people who were even connected to the apostles themselves would often kind of tell you, look at these other books. Look, we're writing these other books. Go look at some of the other books like Enoch, yada, 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 things that were kept out of the Bible. And so I do think that there's a lot of questions that can be answered by considering that there are tons of other books that have Jesus's red letter words in them. Yes, there is a lot of speakings of Jesus in the Bible, but there are also a lot of speakings of Jesus, of what he actually said, that are out of the Bible. And it was the church fathers that we had to hope put all the right ones in the Bible. But I'm sure you guys can understand that that might not be the case. So with that being said, I am going to finish off this book here, or this video here. And I'm going to start working on some more of my research on my Patreon about the Gnostic concepts and the apocryphal books of Mary that might be of some interest to people.